an understanding of the United States is incomplete without an understanding of the contributions of African Americans and is also the experiences and struggles. I don't sound loud. It's on my voice, maybe. The various events that we have organized at MCC this month strive to give us this opportunity to gain a better understanding. We hope this panel is a forum for our African American colleagues and students to enlighten us and tell us their many stories. My name is Sheila Venkatswamy. I'm an instructor in sociology.
And my name is Mike Reagan, also instructor of sociology.
And we are going to be the moderators for this panel. The format for the panel is as follows. After a brief introduction from our participants, we will proceed to questions. Question can be answered by any of the panelists. The last 15 to 20 minutes will be reserved for audience questions. We request the audience to please switch off your cell phones or put them on vibrate. Thank you. So we would like to have introductions from the panelists. Could you please tell us a little bit about where you lived, your educational level, your career, etc.?
Yes, sir. My name is Tasha. I'm a student here at MTC. I live in Woodstock, and yeah.
Hi, I'm Sandra Hesmall, and I'm Director of Recruitment and Staffing here in HR. I've been at the college for 18 years, but that's still a long time. And I've been in the county for over 25 years in McHenry County.
I am Stephen Mujeye. I'm instructor of networking. I've been at the college since 2012.
I'm Patrice. I'm a student at MCC, as well as I work in the Student Success Center and also with New Student Orientation.
I'm Adrienne Hutchinson, and I have been here for 6 years, and I'm the dean over areas involved with tutoring, access and disability services, and I work with developmental education, English and math.
My name is Lawrence Roberts. I'm a student here at MCC. I'm currently living in Lake in the Hills, Illinois, and then I don't know what my career is.
Thank you. All right, the first question we have for the panel, how do you identify yourself? For example, African American, Black American, biracial, or American?
I identify myself as a Black American.
I primarily use the term Black American or African American.
Either or.
I go with American first, Black American, and mixed race.
I usually go by African or Zambian if I want to be specific, and sometimes just go as a Black woman, whatever it is.
Okay, I was born in Africa, so I identify myself as African, and I got naturalized as an American citizen, so now I'm an American. I identify myself as American. So African, some American, African American, Black, you know, all those identify.
We would request you to share any interesting stories that you would like to present to us, which have really helped you understand your identity. These could be stories that you've heard from your ancestors, or songs that have some meanings, role models.
Well, when it comes to the misconception, what comes into my mind in my situation, since I mentioned that I was born in Africa, I think sometimes there are people who come up to me and expect me to know everything about Africa. Some people think that I should know everything African. You know, they look at Africa as a continent. There are some popular languages in Africa, like Swahili. You know, I don't speak those languages because they are not spoken from where I come from. Same thing with Zulu or Xhosa from South Africa. Even though my country neighbors with South Africa, I do not speak those languages. You know, so I think for me that's one of the great misconceptions that I see.
A misconception that I face has been when I tell people that I was born in Africa or that I'm Zambian, they tend to think that, like, sometimes my teachers are surprised at how well I speak English, which is insane. But I've been here for 21 years now, but that's a misconception, but a story that has helped me understand who I am. It's not really a story, it's just growing up where I grew up. I grew up in Pittsburgh, and in that community, it's like very, like, you have like your different groups and like ethnicities, but like I had a main like Zambian friends, like Zambian, like my family was around me, so like we just share stories, share meals and everything, and that's like really what helped me realize who I was as a person and where I come from.
Okay, misconception. I would say that that all of us are like all black or people of the same hue are all the same, have the same background. So I think that's a huge misconception, as you can tell just from our just short discussion right here. And then in terms of the background that I have, which is an interesting one, but my family traced back from when the owners, the white slave owners, back to their genealogy and history, which is back to King Charlemagne, and they came here to America, and back to they were in Virginia originally, and then moved to Tennessee area, the descendants, and that's where my family began their life of slavery with that family. So one of the things through that, King Charlemagne, he's one of the 14 signers of the Magna Carta. And then from them, those owners later gave my ancestors land, and that helped my family move forward. So that's kind of where my roots are, also southern roots of Tennessee, and then moved here to Illinois.
Misconceptions. That we all think alike. Little history. Well, my family is from down south, Jackson, Alabama, Mississippi. I know I have no idea about it because I don't go down there. I guess I kind of adapt to any situation, any given situation. So another misconception could be that we all speak the same. We all speak slang. I'm good at slang. And that we all have a Chicagoan type accent, or that I talk fast. So.
A big misconception, or two big misconceptions, I think. One, that black people aren't smart, that we lack high levels of intelligence. That has been seen throughout history. I still get surprised today when I tell people what college I've come from, and the first reaction most people have is, "You went there," because I went to Georgetown University. Like, I couldn't have gone to Georgetown University. So there's still that, for black people to be in higher education, to receive degrees, to be able to be at highly selected schools, is just problematic for some. And the idea that we all have this sort of criminal element or background behind us. So you see a lot in the news about cases of black people being gunned down, cases of a lot of police abuse, cases of a lot of violence happening on our community, because that's what the news puts on our community. I used to work in a K-12 district at the height of what I would say was the the influence of the crack epidemic in the black community. And a lot of people just assumed that all these black children, either they were not smart, they were crack babies, they were this, they were that, the negatives, their parents were on drugs. And I used to tell people all the time, think about, for people who knew black people, who actually had relationships with black people, think about the number of people that you know. Think about these kids in this school district, because it was a diverse school district. How many of them are in trouble? How many of them in crime? How many of them go to school? It is not the majority of them. It's not even 95% of them. Yet we have this portrayal that they're less than. We have this portrayal that they're going to grow up to be in prison. So lack of intelligence and likely to be criminals are two things. Many black people can tell the story about, you know, someone grabbing their purse when you walk by. That's even for men or women, being followed around in stores, and that's a real experience for a lot of black people, unfortunately. Where I'm from, I forgot to mention, I'm originally from South Carolina, which is where a lot of slaves rather came in through Charleston in South Carolina. So Georgia, South Carolina, and Virginia were huge slave states. I call it the great slave state of South Carolina because there are a lot of black people in South Carolina still today. And if you wanted to trace some of your roots back, you can look back, if you're going back through slavery, be able to maybe pinpoint coming through South Carolina at some point. And my family is from two spots in South Carolina, near the North Carolina border, and then also down near the Sea Islands of South Carolina. So Gullah culture is also a part of my family. For a lot of the young people in there, you may remember this cartoon called Gullah Gullah Island off of public television that was based out of St. Helena's Island in the Sea Islands area of South Carolina. So that tells you a little bit about some of my family's history.
One of the biggest misconceptions that for me was basically when I'm originally from Detroit and everything, so I used to grow up around there at the most time, because around that time I didn't know what the world was really, and it was just like a difficult world for me. And growing up around there was really tough because most of the time there would be gang violences and just a lot of other stuff, and then people would stereotype me, basically they'd be saying the N-word sometimes, and it would be really just kind of disrespectful to me, because then I didn't know what it really meant. But then I kind of learned on from it, because I grew up around white people at the time, because in Detroit there was a more diverse school, but there was more white kids, and you ever saw a black kid going to the school just getting an education or something, and it was really a difficult time for people to go through that, because I struggled through most of my life during that time. I didn't know what I was really doing. I had anxiety problems, I had social problems, I had a learning disability, and it was more of a difficult time for me during that time. And I think it's a really difficult challenge for me just to get through that time. And now that I'm here in Illinois, trying to figure out my career and other things, and just figure out what I want to do with the rest of my life, it was just a difficult time for me to get through this year.
All right, our next question is, what challenges do you think exist for black men and women in American society today?
Well, I have 3 children, and my last born was born 3 years ago. And my wife, who also is from Zimbabwe, where I'm from, I remember when we were going, when she was pregnant, she was in the getting towards the late 30s when we had the last born. And one of the things that they said that still struck with me was the fact that, of course, she was at high risk because of the age, as well as being African, and right there is one of the things that I see as a challenge, because I hear that those of African Americans are 4 or more times as likely to die during pregnancy, and their children are at risk as well. So I do see that as a challenge when it comes to African American women or during childbirth. So I think that's a challenge that they face when compared to other races like white women.
Challenges, there's obviously a lot, and for Black men, to be specific, I think as overdramatic as people may take this, it's like a challenge for them to just live their basic lives. As you can see on the news, these stories of them getting gunned down for simple things that it's like crazy. Just innocent men being killed every day. So I think that's a definite challenge for Black men. And for Black women, for myself, what I've experienced is it's a lot of work to do anything at all. People always stereotype you as being angry or upset or crazy, or jealous, whatever it may be. There's always a stereotype that comes with being a Black woman. And it's also just a struggle in general, a challenge to be a woman in America, because you don't get the same equality, and you can only imagine being Black on top of that. It's very hard to make a way through and try to get to where you want to be. You want to be ambitious, whereas I want to go to school to be a pediatrician, and I'm coming with roadblocks. A lot of my teachers have actually asked me, are you sure? I don't think that's maybe, that's going to be a lot of work. I understand that's going to be a lot of work. And I'm willing to put that work in, and I'm willing to prove people wrong. But I think that's definitely a challenge. We're looked at as less than and not able, and just she was talking about how they don't think that we're smart enough, or they don't really expect us to be able to do what they're able to do. And I think that we're all the same, regardless of your color or where you came from. If I believe I'm smart enough to be a doctor, then I'm smart enough to be a doctor. If you believe that you're smart enough to be an engineer, you're going to be an engineer. You know what I mean? So definitely, I think that's a challenge as an African American woman and as just Blacks in America in general.
I think that one of the challenges is just equal access, equal opportunity. I mean, truly having that and feeling that is what you do have, and not being in the shadows of privilege. That's the greatest challenge. What I see is certainly a different picture, because as if someone looks different than you, you're usually choosing or selecting to be with that person that looks, or that individual that looks most aligned with who you are or what you look like. So the challenge we have is just equal access and equal opportunity.
Yeah. The challenges I would think would be just knowing your true history and being able to share it and express it and explain it to others. I think the lack of knowing who we are and where we come from and sharing that with others so they get a better understanding that we've been through struggles, and the struggles still exist, and that opportunities are still hard to get, and that our own, amongst ourselves, we have to realize that we have it, we got it, use it, flaunt it, take the same opportunities, apply when you deny, keep applying for things. You just have to believe in yourself, and you have to show everybody else that you believe in yourself. The lack of confidence is a big problem. So if we share it and understand it and let people know the true history, not what we learned in school or what they learned or did not learn, let me say, would change a lot.
Several things come to mind for me in terms of challenges. One is this current resurgence of hate that has taken place in America. Just a lot of hate at different levels, a lot of hate towards people purely because of their race or ethnicity in this country. And we certainly do not want to go back to the resurgence that happened in Jim Crow, the resurgence that happened in slavery. That was hundreds of years. Hundreds of years. We're not even 100 years out from all of that. And we're seeing this resurgence again. Also, I just came back from a funeral in South Carolina, and my mother is from a place that is very rural and became very desolate. Trying to think, like US 14 here, Highway 14 here, there was a highway on the East Coast that took you from north to south called 301. And when she was a kid, 301 went through her town, and then the interstate was built. Interstate 95 was built. And so that town became very desolate. Well, I would call it desolate because on the road in which my grandparents lived, there was my grandparents, our family, and then the plantation on the other end, and that was it in this rural area. So this town today even looks more desolate. And my mother used to say the country really was full of people. And I just, as a kid, I couldn't imagine like a whole lot of people living out in this country. So what you're having in rural areas is where, as also in cities, is this resegregation that's taking place, where segregation in our schools, segregation in the communities, is happening big time. And when you have resegregation, you tend to have isolation, and you tend to put more people at a disadvantage. And then the other thing is injustice. When black people fight injustice in this country, we almost become villainized, and we're called un-American. But if we didn't fight for the injustices, there's no way we can have access to what we have today. There's no way we could sit here, be employed, be students, be able to go to the same movie theaters and hotels, all of that. So if it takes being called un-American, then I'd rather be called an American to be able to fight injustice.
I think some of like the hardest challenges for like being a black person was basically most of the time that I would get like random questions like, oh, do you play basketball? Do you like sports and everything? And that would be one of like the typical challenges that I get every day. And people would ask me that question, just like if you're into sports and everything, because most people didn't know that like I'm not a huge sports person, and then like I don't really associate with it because my dad, he was more of the sports person, so he would talk about sports more often. He would bring up the discussions, and he would be the one to like talk about it, because then he would be like, he's into sports, and then I have a different like viewpoint of it. Like I don't like sports, and it would be like, oh, if you don't like sports, then why do you care about it? Like, one, I do not care for it. Two, it's just that I'm not a person that sees sport as like as an interest for me, because it's just, I wasn't really into it, because like I grew up with it somewhat back during my childhood, but then I was like, I don't like it anymore, because it wasn't the fitting need that I needed to know. And then another challenge would be, I used to be called a lot of names back in the day, because I was like really tall for a black dude, because most kids didn't know that like I was really tall back in the day. I was like at least 5'10", and it was just like a difficult time for me, and I was really nervous about stuff, and it really kind of pushed my point of like people stereotyping like how tall I was, like do I do anything for like for sport or just anything really in general. And I think that was kind of like what is the challenge for black guys, black Americans nowadays.
Can I just add a comment to Patrice was mentioning to know your history, and just a conversation I had this morning with my mom as I was just going over, just looking back at our heritage and so forth, and she's telling me the story all about this King Alfred, and we had all the genealogy on the slave owners, but none on us after what happened from Africa. We didn't have that background, so I asked my mom, why don't we know that? Why did it kind of stop until my great-grandfathers and family units began? And she said because that history and time with slavery was so painful that there weren't stories. No one shared stories. And I'm still kind of saddened by that, to hear her say that now, that it was such a painful point. And I think that's why we don't have stories. We don't have that. It's kind of like that lost period in our lives, because it was something that was so horrific and horrible, wasn't discussed.
So So I want to bring forth a question which will also help us understand how to celebrate your heritage here. What do you do to celebrate your heritage?
Well, again, that goes back to the heritage. What is that? The heritage of slavery here in America. The one thing that we, in my family reunions are really huge, and Adrian and I will be talking about that. Plug on our panel, our session coming up soon. But family, just the family unity. So we celebrate that through family reunions that are taken very seriously, and historically we do it every 2 years in different locations. So at the family reunion, to embrace, and family is really important in my family, and just bonding with one another, I know my cousins from 5 and 6, step cousins back in the history there. And then also through food. And actually one of the things from my heritage, I celebrate St. Patty's Day because my great-grandmother was married to an Irishman, and so St. Patty's Day is a big part of what I celebrate as well.
I celebrate my heritage by literally just living it. I go home, my mom always cooks traditional dishes, and to family events, we always have a traditional, we have just traditional events all the time, like birthdays and celebrations, so we go out to Pittsburgh for those. We also have traditional weddings, and as well as like traditional weddings in Africa and traditional weddings here. So we have both. So if someone's getting married in our family or our community, they have a traditional wedding and then a white dress traditional wedding. So I guess that's what I do.
Yeah, for me, I guess it will be a combination of what Sandra and Tasha said, the family reunions. We do those to celebrate our heritage. And then the same thing with food. There are some traditional foods that we eat, and the main one, I'm sure Tasha might know it from Zimbabwe, is this dish that we make with cornmeal. And when we have weddings, that's another great way to celebrate our heritage, by playing music by African musicians, and doing some dances that are of African origin as well. So those are ways that we celebrate our heritage.
I actually love this time of the year, Black History Month in particular, and starting from January really on through March, from Martin Luther King on through Women's History. Because this time of the year you actually have some of the most events put on. It's a celebration of Black life, Black culture, Black intelligence, Black music, Black dance, Black food. You have all these opportunities, and a lot of people do not necessarily get these opportunities throughout the year or don't have them to create it. So in addition to like family reunions, this time of the month, and because of the funeral I didn't get to plan yet, but usually I have mapped out all these different like free events, and then the stuff that we're going to pay for, because you can find a lot of free events to go and just experience Black culture. I live in Lake County, which is a lot more diverse than McHenry County, but I do not live in a diverse area in Lake County. So it really does take effort to go out when you live in predominantly white. It would not have taken effort for me in South Carolina. That was very easy to do, but it takes a lot more effort up here. So I like putting the effort in. So if you haven't, just take a look in the paper, look for some of the events and see what's happening out in the community to be able to explore Black people, Black life, Black community, and what that really means. Because Black history and Black History Month was created to celebrate not just our history, but also our accomplishments as well as our lives. So it doesn't stop at a historical perspective. It is going on still today.
So what do I do to celebrate the Black History Month, sometimes I go back into history and just kind of look back into the old days of like how things were and just how I used to look up to Martin Luther King Jr. a lot of the days because my dad was telling me this one quote that he really told me was like, son, when have you ever thought about like freedom and everything? And then I gave him the question like, what is freedom really? And then this is what he exactly told me. He said, freedom is like where you get to express who you are for who you originally came from, what origin of your past, your life, and your history. Just, that's what he kind of told me, and like I kind of reflect that upon that day, because after he told me that, I kind of go back into history and kind of look online and look towards like Black History Month. It's just like a celebration as like freedom and accomplishment, and where we are today is thinking that it's like more of as a freedom of like showing that we are a more of like a welcoming community instead of just more of like a diverse, hated group that's shown to know for what they fought for, where we are today, and just to think about how we've gotten to this far of history, just showing us that like people can still change, and like they can't always be like hateful, but they can always show like love and appreciation for what they are.
And I want to add to, and for the young people out the audience, the recent high school grads, in your schools, do you ever study Black history, or do you celebrate Black History Month? Because I found that a couple of the districts in Lake County where we've lived, there are no cultural celebrations whatsoever in the school system. No recognition of history, and I have been sorely disappointed, sorely disappointed. They happen in the East, where there are actually a lot more diverse communities in Lake County, but not the rest of the county. You don't even get that. So you get no introduction, no exploration, because when you think about it, most of us, a lot of us don't necessarily have friends outside of our races, even still to this day, that we don't have a lot of friends. So there is no one for you maybe to connect with on a personal level, and then there's nothing for you to gain even in schools. So I'm glad that the college still celebrates the culture of many different people that have settled here in this country.
Well, for me, I do a lot of volunteer services doing Black History Month, and I also read more on other people in history that are not given their due diligence. I don't read about the common ones, the ones that most other cultures would recognize, like Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King. They're not just the only ones. We have a lot of history, a lot of people who existed and who contributed to the world. So I try to learn more and read more, research more during that time. And I also, do a little cooking here and now for the kids, so that they'll know the recipes that my parents and my grandparents passed on.
You had mentioned several contributions by Martin Luther King Jr. and also Patrice, you had mentioned some. So what do you consider to be one or two of the greatest contributions of African Americans to the United States?
Well, of course, that goes without saying, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. That's the greatest for everyone. And they're just, Rosa Parks, people who stood up, sadly enough, Harriet Tubman as well, hoping to, free slaves and underground and so forth. There's just, the sad part is I don't know all their names. So as you mentioned with Black history, I began to refresh my mind with history. And it's not just Black history. Ask me about American history. I don't, Columbus, I can tell you that, but I can't tell you all the people who invented everything. And it's like, that's another misnomer, whatever. Black people don't know every Black person that did everything. And I can't tell you that either. So those are the ones that come most to mind to me. George Washington Carver is another.
I don't have specific people. I really just recognize the contribution of Black historical figures, and not even, not the ones that were well known. Like, it doesn't matter who they are, just people that sacrificed and used their life to make sure that we have what we have today. People who propelled our people into a better life. There's still work to do, but those people sacrificed so that we could be here and so that we could get an education, so we could do things that everybody else got to do and gets to do. So I think that's probably the greatest contribution. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think along the same lines, you know, and people like Rosa Parks come to mind. What they did wasn't easy. You know, they were dealing with real challenges at the time. And then I think to be able to stand up to those challenges, you know, and have things change to a way where even though we still face challenges today, I think their contribution, because of their contributions, things are different than they used to. So I think but that's one person who comes in mind when it comes to contributions.
In general, black people have done more than just survive. Black people are actually thriving in this country, because when you think about it, African slaves were brought over to this country for the free labor to build this country back in the 1500s, in the early 1500s. Slavery didn't officially end in 1865. To 1865, that was a long time of suppression. That was a long time of not being considered a citizen. That was a long time of not being able to have the rights of this country. And then we had to legislate slowly and slowly after that through different rights to come. So just being as a people to survive that, we'd be able to survive heroin of the 70s, crack of the 80s, and the early 90s, mass incarceration, all of that, and still making a contribution. And beyond belief, the influence of black art, black culture, black music, black food, black dance on every fabric of this society is known. Our influence has been huge, and it comes from the roots of Africa.
Yeah, everything Adrian said, it. Yeah, it's true. Along with the fact that just continue the conversation, not being silent anymore, being able to handle things on a level, you know, still the peace factor with Martin Luther King, but yet still like Malcolm X. Don't get settled, don't get set in your ways. You still have to talk, you still have to have that conversation, leave room for conversation so that people know that you are also a standing group of people. So that's what I look for.
All right, now Sandra, you already touched on the importance of family, and do another plug for you and Adrian's presentation next week on Family Matters with the importance of family and family reunions. So I like this next question here. How do you think that your family's history has affected your life?
Well, I have to be grateful and thankful for the Taylor family. That's who owned my ancestors, in the fact that they were compassionate and giving. They gave my great-great-grandfather over 100 acres so that he could start a new life, so a life of freedom. So because of that, that allowed him giving that land, then allowed my ancestors, my family, to progress. And that generosity and that land is what allows my big farming family. Historically, there's just a few of us, a few left. I have one cousin that still farms the remainder of approximately 50 acres. But we have a family cemetery that's just dedicated to our family off land that was given, again, from that owner. So I guess if you want to call it at that time, kind of wealth, has passed through and helped flourish and feed the family in Tennessee, and then my parents coming here, and so that opportunity is what made a difference for my family. And so seeing that hard work, farming, community of the South, hard work, hard family, and just believing what you can do, believing who you can be, and having my parents with that foundation and that belief and continues to influence me. They never, throughout my family, it was always dream and be and do what you can. We're going to give you what you need to get where you have to, where you want to go and what you want to do. So that's it, continues to be an influence on me.
My family's history has definitely affected me. Both my mom and dad, their fathers passed when they were young, and so it was a struggle for their mother to take care of all these kids. I believe my dad has 8 siblings and my mom has 12. And so, as you can imagine, it was hard for them to make it. And that history has affected my mom. She's a hard worker, and so is my dad. And they've passed that on to me and my brothers and sisters, showing us what it means to, if you want something, you go get it. You have to give your all for it. You have to be selfish at times to make sure that some things happen for you. And it's also affected me in it's not like a legal way, but just like them being from Africa and coming over here, there's a lot of limitations to what I can do and what I can receive. And like things that are usually help to like propel people forward, like financial aid and all these things. I don't get to have that because of my family's history and where I'm from and where I was born. But again, my mom and dad's life lessons of being hard workers has taught me that I can do it. Like I've been making it happen and been paying for school like with scholarships and out of pocket. So I think that definitely my family's history has affected me in a positive way.
And I kind of I'm in a similar situation with Tasha, because when looking at family being having been born in Zimbabwe, my parents grew up during a time where Zimbabwe, believe it, was fighting against the colonialism from Britain. The British had come and colonized Zimbabwe, and we had to fight in Zimbabwe to gain our independence. So my father was young when that war was going on, and that affected his ability to go to school. So he doesn't have much education. And yet without that education, he is somebody who truly believed in education and hard work. And that he was able to pass along to me, and the fact that I was able to come to the United States was only possible because of him, coming as a student. He, with the limited resources that he had to sacrifice, to send me here. So that has greatly impacted me. Otherwise, without that determination and hard work from him, I would not be where I am today.
For me, I actually have a diverse background. My grandfather's father is white, and that was from a non-consensual relationship. We used to say my grandmother was, great-grandmother rather, was in her 90s when she died, not born not far beyond slavery, and we used to say she was black as coal in terms of her skin. My grandfather is very light with blue eyes. So there's a rainbow of shades in my family. My mother's 13 siblings. And my grandfather, Sandra and I have similar backgrounds, but we tell that story very differently. My mother would not ever trace the white side of her family, even though recently the plantation that's on the road with them, surely his father came from that. That was from where their ownership is. There's been this reunion taking place of the the descendants of the blacks, descendants of the slaves, and the plantation owners. So my mother's sister, being my mother, will not go. She will not participate in that, since that was non-consensual. So she doesn't care to know that side of her family. But there was an advantage because my grandfather got this land, and there were big, small farmers in South Carolina because of this land. And it afforded her, all of her siblings, to all have gotten college degrees, which is an unheard of thing at the time, but they all managed to do that. And my mother, this Friday, will be 79. And she went to, I don't know if you've seen in the media today, raising money for one of the historically black colleges for females in the country, Bennett College, the smaller one, not Smelvin, everyone knows about. My mother got her degree from Bennett College in education. My father's side of the family were also landowners, and they fought for voting for black people in South Carolina, where I'm from, and that right to vote, that right to maintain and own and to keep your own property. So on both sides, I have that. And then there's also a Native American influence down from my mother's side of the family. We used to call this town when I was little, because in South Carolina we pronounce things a little differently than a lot of other people. I say pecan, a lot of people say pecan. I say caramel versus caramel. We called it the Yamasee. The town was called Yamasee, and the Yamasee Indians, the native pronunciation is Yamasee, and that tribe got distributed. They were enslaved Indians in this country as well, and then there were some wars, and they went to either Florida or got scattered in South Carolina. They are in my family, and apparently the chief of the tribe right now, one of our cousins, traced her tribal roots, one of the chief, a young man younger than me, is the chief of this tribe, and he moved back from Florida to South Carolina, and so they're reestablishing the tribe there. So we have similar, so gotta come more next week, another plug for our Black Student Wealth program on how the family does influence, but family reunions are huge. They're on both sides of my family. Every year I'm at one. Could be at 2 in 1 year, Finland.
Well, you can trace my history back to some Native Americans. I had the blessing to know my great-grandfather. He was probably 98 when he passed. What I gather from my family history is a lot of medical history. So I'm just going to give a plug. Study your medical history. It saves you a lot of time, a lot of money. Probably gets you well faster than others. And I was able to just see how health affects through history. I took care of my grandmother in 8th grade. I was in 8th grade and my grandmother got deathly ill, and I helped with the personal nurse to take care of her, the things that my mom and my aunts couldn't handle. I did the same thing with my mom, and knowing my history kept me alive. So I'm gonna give you a plug, seriously. Know your history, know where you come from, know what your family was sick with, because it'll save you in the long run.
Okay, thank you. We would like to open to the audience for questions.
I was wondering if you see any sort of thing so I'm German and Native American, and I've run into things like, well, you're not dark enough, your hair's not dark, you're not Native American. And truth be told, I sing a lot of the traditional songs for the ceremonies, and I'm very involved in the old ceremonies that way. I was wondering if any of you folks run into that in a way, and how important that is to stamp out for people, all the people, to progress and move forward.
I think more so in, I don't know if this has like been a thing for older generations, but for younger generations, there's been a split of light skin, dark skin, and brown skin people. Whereas the darker you get, the more aggressive you're seen as. And I don't know if that's like the same thing as what you're referring to, but that's something that I've experienced and that I've gone through, and as well as like my friends and the people in my community. But
Tasha is right. The color line in the black community is real, and if the lighter you are, and if you were like my grandfather, you potentially could have passed for white. Nobody in my family passed for white there, but that is, or people saying, well, you can't be. My aunt who just passed away, she lived in Harlem, so everybody thought she was Hispanic because of her likeness. Didn't speak a word of Spanish. All those 50 years in New York, she never picked up Spanish. I don't know why, but she didn't. But everybody thought she was Puerto Rican when she was riding the bus. But that's just how light she was. But the shades just ran in my family, but everybody in my family identified black.
I just wanted to add on to that. So in my family, we're all different shades. Me and my younger sister are close in shade, and then my brother is darker than us, and my sister is very light. Like she looks like she's from like a different family. And you can just see the difference when we were growing up, because we're only 2 years apart, so I'd spent 2 years in high school with her. You could see the difference in how they treated her and how they treated me. Obviously, my teachers treated me well because, you know, like I was a good student and everything, but when it came to like socially and being like friends with other people, you could see how they treated her like the top of the tier, and she was like the best and all these things. You wasn't, but who cares? But no, and it's like I had to work a little harder to make friends because everyone thinks that I'm standoffish, and really I'm not. I'm really friendly. Most of the time I just look like I'm mean mugging people because I just naturally rest my face, like. But yeah, so it was definitely harder for me and my sisters because we had to keep like a natural like soft smile on our face to make sure that people didn't think that we were intimidating, whereas my sister, people would just walk up to her and like start talking to her and all these things. So.
And I had a similar experience with my sisters and the Hughes in my family. We also have a Native American, it's also part of my race, but Cherokee. Within my sisters, we had 3 Hughes, starting with my oldest was a darker complexion, then me in the middle, and then my younger sister's even lighter. She has more characteristics of like Irish. She has green eyes, and she, growing up, she had more sandy blonde hair. And then my older sister, though, has more of the Native American features in her hair and her skin tone and so forth. So it just within the family. And then there are certain ways you're treated. In my neighborhood that we lived in, we were the only black family originally that moved into the neighborhood. And there was a country club that was part of the neighborhood, and we stayed on the waiting list the entire high school and for over into my sister's high school. So that was about 8 years. We stayed on the waiting list to get in that country club. But my sister was very fair, and she would go to the club. But we couldn't. We stayed on that list forever. And that was, that was in mid to late 70s. So that's just what we experienced. So we joined it. I went to another club down the street, but still.
I can talk loud. Okay, so I'm Jamaican, and like when I talk to people, they're like, "Oh, you're not American, or you're Jamaican, so you're not Black American," and I feel really violated by it, and it's mostly to like my white friends or my Hispanic friends, and so I want to know if it's just like people that are illiterate, or it's just that I'm Jamaican, I'm an islander, or I am not Black American, I don't know. Or people are just illiterate. Or if it's just
illiterate. No, I was like, you're black, so no, yeah. That's weird that they say that you're not black, you are. And I think that I've only ran into that situation twice when I told people that I'm Zambian. They're like, oh, you're African, so that means you're not African American. I'm like, I think that you need help. But no, yeah, that's illiterate is the answer to your question.
Well, I can say this, from people that I know that are from the islands, some islands do not claim to be African Americans.
Yeah,
I have to post it. So that's not outside of the race, that's within the race. The prejudice is within the race. So, which is odd to me, it's fine that you're from the islands, but you come here, you're gonna be treated just like every other random black person.
because I see myself as a black person.
Right.
Yeah, I just want to comment what you're saying there. Remember a story here in McHenry County where the woman was making sure her accent was still there, so she wouldn't be viewed as African American.
Yeah, that's
what you're talking about. Yeah.
That's something that I deal with, all the time, and isn't it great that was our first question, that how do we identify ourselves as, and sometimes I think there can be a problem of not knowing your identity. Like in my situation, do I identify with Africans or do I identify with African Americans? Because sometimes it seems like I obviously talk differently than them, and sometimes it seems like I don't quite fit in with them, and how do I there can be challenges with identities in that aspect, as it can be a challenging situation to identify where exactly do I fit in.
And those for, especially those from biracial and mixed race heritage, it's even harder because people will put an identity on you even when you may not want one of a specific race or not, because you could be both, or you could be 2 or 3 people or 4 people in your family, and people will identify you based off of your looks, what they think. So the lighter you are, the less likely you could be called black if one of your parents is black, or black and white even though the parent is something else and something else. That the identity can be upon them, because I have that in my family. I have some cousins that are white and black, and they look white, so most people would not identify them as white. And they're boys, and when they were dating, my aunt, who's white, would tell their girlfriends, my children are black. And she had to make that statement because that particular uncle was very light with blue eyes, and so they looked like a white family except for his hair. You have to take a look, but except for his hair. And she would tell that because you never know. We used to joke that Mama Tina was going to come out on. I told you, my great-grandmother was dark, right? So there is no mistaking. The 2 of them could look white, the girlfriends could be white, they could look white, they could have this black child. And she didn't want to shock anybody's white family that their children were not.
I recently, so I recently got into a conversation with somebody who is white, and we were kind of debating back and forth on a topic, and I quickly realized that he didn't know the difference between ethnicity and nationality and race. So I felt like I thought I was having one conversation, but here I had to go back to just the basic words that we were using to educate the difference between nationality. We're all American unless you're not an American citizen. Number one. Then number 2, like you say, who do I choose to identify with? I've got about 8 nationalities, or I should say, correct myself, ethnicities within my body. And I happen to identify with the family that I grew up with. Most people here in McHenry County think I'm Mexican or some Spanish descent, but I'm Hawaiian. And but nobody knows that unless they get to know me. So like Patrice says, conversations, get to know people and educate yourself. I mean, not even about my race or ethnicity, but just educate yourself on vocabulary. Do you know the difference between nationality, ethnicity, and race? We're all part of the human race. If you're born and raised or live here in the United States of America, you are American. And then whatever ethnicity you choose to identify with. So I feel like education is so important. Just kind of wanted to make that comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wonderful job. Thank you. One more question. Oh, sorry. Okay. Thank you. Sorry.
You know, when my family and I, we moved to McHenry County probably about 11 years ago, and the school that the school that my children attended, they didn't celebrate Martin Luther King's birthday, and I was just wondering, and I do know just recently I did hear of some other schools that don't celebrate his birthday. What do you need to do to try to change that and fix that? Who would you talk to? And that's my first question. The second question is, what would you need to do to implement a Black History program or something in some of the suburban schools? You know, who would you need to talk to, or you know, go by doing that?
I suggest maybe attending one of the board meetings and taking 3 minutes to share your interests, whether the school district that you're in. You could start internally first with their teachers, or superintendent, principal, what have you, but go to a board meeting and just share that you'd like to see that be a consideration. For several years, the college did not recognize, you know, it wasn't a holiday, Martin Luther King. That was not a holiday, but I'm going to thank the faculty. They have a lot of weight here. And they really, it took, I don't know, over a year, about 2 years.
2 years of discussion.
2 years of.
And then finally a board presentation to make it happen.
Yes, but talking to our trustees and making that important. So here we are now. So yeah, thank you. Thank you, faculty. But that's how you start the conversation.
And be consistent, and also get some signatures involved. And if the school doesn't do it, start doing work. You need to talk to your alderman and your congressman.
And
so you have to go beyond.
Yeah, or your PTA, you know, PTO, what are they now? PTA still, are they still called that? PTO. PTO, you might lead the effort, you know, and just ask if you can come that day to share something or send something in with your children that are attending the school, just to, again, start the conversation, because sometimes they just, because your child, or they may not know how to start it or have the interest and just need you to lead the effort, so volunteer to do that. Good luck.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time and your stories. Thank you.